credible voice in true crime. Today we're going to be looking at a question that many of us have been wondering for a long time. Is Thrive the missing piece of the puzzle? Thrive is undoubtedly relevant to the Watts case. The question is, how big was the Thrive piece in terms of the total puzzle? Prior to the Lifetime movie, many were led to believe that the movie was going to take a bold new look into this area, declaring unambiguously, Thrive turned Chris Watts into a murderous rage monster. And I made a video about that. Instead, the Lifetime movie simply referenced Thrive as part of the overall veneer of the Watts case. Shanann was always on Facebook, always thriving. Chris Watts used Thrive and it transformed him physically. No big deal. Yes, we already know that. What more than this? What's often unacknowledged is how Thrive transformed the Watts couple and the Watts family in other ways as well. In terms of money, I've blogged previously and written in some detail about MLMs and money. So we won't go into the well-known relationship between MLMs and financial ruin for multi-level marketers. Just as we don't know the size of the Thrive puzzle piece, one reason for this is we can't be sure to what extent Thrive was responsible for the Watts' desperate financial situation. We do know the Watts' finances were an unmitigated disaster, so one can say with reasonable certainty, from the perspective of finances alone, that the Thrive puzzle piece was very significant. In terms of this kind of mysterious area, I believe there's another YouTube creator who has sort of almost unambiguously stated kind of as a fact that because of X, Y, and Z and because of other promoters he spoke to, Shanann probably earned whatever it was, I guess $60,000 a month. I don't put much stake in that at all. Firstly, because the people he spoke to are incentivized to sell Thrive. It's not from someone outside of the industry. It is someone who's got a horse in the race, so to speak. The other aspect is, I don't know whether this income includes the expenses in buying these powders and then sort of reselling them. I mean, the way it works is you've got to buy the product, stockpile it, and that's also a way you make more money, supposedly. You stockpile huge bulk orders of it, and then you sell it, I guess, at a discount. And, you just have to look at the basement, the Watts family basement, to see how much is stockpiled there, and so obviously how much product hasn't been sold, product and other things as well. Now let's deal with the family fabric. I've also covered the damage to the family fabric that constantly monetizing private moments, which is the stock and trade of the whole social media enabled aspect of Thrive. Doing this constantly for a social media audience, what kind of damage might this do to the family fabric? And I dealt with this in my third book, Two Pollyannas. In that book, the Pollyannas referred to Anadarko and Lev-vel. I think a lot of people thought it referred to Chris Watts and Shanann or something like that, but it was to the two big companies involved in this case. And both companies have had a interesting past where they are very seldom discussed. They're almost never criticized. They're just given a free pass in terms of the characters involved in this case. It's also clear Shanann was building up to a Thrive-themed pregnancy, and though Thrive can't be blamed entirely for Shanann's intention to keep up appearances, it certainly didn't help matters when their marriage was in trouble. We know that when her marriage was in trouble, she didn't really intimate as much on Facebook. Instead, she kind of did the opposite. She kind of made it seem as though everything was going really well, which is why the media and the public kind of got the sense of this perfect happily family postcard. You couldn't see, based on looking at the social media, that there was anything wrong. And that was what Thrive was kind of conditioning everyone to do, is just talk up everything, talk about how great everything is. Don't complain about anything, just sell, promote the fairy tale. There's also the psychological aspect, which is perhaps the most interesting and unresearched area in terms of the Thrive aspect. Did using Thrive boost the Watts couple in other ways besides weight loss? Both Chris Watts and Shanann got an ego boost, not only from improved self-confidence and confidence in their own skin, but there was a confidence associated with popularity, in other words, a social confidence that came with the territory. Shanann found a large group of new friends, obviously all Thrive promoters, and Watts found Kissinger. Thrive made Shanann and Chris less introverted, but especially Shanann. It also emphasized other aspects of Shanann's personality, making her more ambitious, more influencing, more controlling certain aspects, less inhibited, and arguably more narcissistic. The link between narcissism and Thrive is clear, but it's the one area where angels fear to tread, even though the topic of narcissism is a well-worn path when it comes to the Watts case. The area of Shanann's narcissism naturally is completely verboten. It's likely Chris Watts was a victim of the Thrive-themed narcissism as well, and perhaps in important ways we have yet to appreciate. For example, the psychology of murdering his entire family in order to jump into a fairy tale life, set up by Thrive in the sense that Watts found himself physically attractive and thus eligible for an affair with a co-worker, is classic magical thinking. Watts was so caught up in magical thinking through the endless Thrive spiels, he seemed to have lost touch with reality itself at the time that all of this happened. The Sermon on the Porch is almost an exhibit in Watts having lost touch with reality. Watts, next to the TV with Trinastich, the neighbor, is like Watts also having lost touch with reality. Chris Watts taking the lie detector test is like a guy who has lost touch with reality. And now we're going to deal with the physical mechanism, and in this respect I'm also going to provide 2 articles in the description, so be sure to go and have a look at that. This is when we talk about the pharmacodynamics of some of the ingredients in these Thrive products, which is quite interesting. But the physical mechanism is certainly a critical area where Thrive did effective work, as I said, via the physical mechanism, by the physical process. It's tough to call which area is the more damaging, the psychological break with reality while boosting the ego, or the physical transformation. On the face of it, one feels the psychological aspect was a constant gnaw on the fabric of reality. But Thrive is a lot of physical things too. Physical patches, physical powders, boxes of product arriving and being dispatched, boxes that have got to be stored somewhere, chemicals fed through the skin into the bloodstream daily, constantly, pills, shakes and candy bars. And were these mood enhancing? And just in that respect, I will also place a link in the description to an ad from Lev-vel, just showing, kind of illustrating, when you put one of these stickers on your skin, how it charges you up, almost this sort of electric sparking of the body via these patches. We know from Nicole Kissinger that they were, in a sense, we know that there was a mood aspect to Thrive, in the sense that Watts was wired constantly. So you could even argue that he was always in the mood when it came to Kissinger, and you could say that Thrive fueled that. This gave him a sense of being a better version of his everyday self. But what about side effects and even distress? Heart palpitations, chest pain, dizziness, nausea, and rapid heartbeat are well-known and well-documented symptoms. What happens when the benefit is so profound the user becomes addicted? Well, one user or one consumer, Maddie Maxwell, a thriver from Glendale in Salt Lake City, Utah, said, "I don't ever want to be a day without it." So a physical transformation does lie at the root of the psychological malaise and magical thinking. But what does that actually mean? So this is a personal kind of disclosure, just giving my kind of intuitive sense of what we are talking about. I recently watched a Finnish-based TV series on Netflix called Ragnarok, in which a teenager starts becoming Thor. A kid starts to get godlike powers and it doesn't end well. So bear in mind what we're talking about is what happens when you have a physical transformation that lies at the root of psychological malaise and magical thinking. In other words, what can a physical transformation do to someone's psychology? And this TV series Ragnarok kind of sketches that out. It kind of provides a demonstration of that. So it starts gradually. The character in Ragnarok starts to develop superhuman abilities. At the same time, the community, including that of his classmates, teachers, and his own family, become more and more wary of him, and he is eventually kicked out of school. He's pursued by the police and assessed in clinical tests as suffering from paranoid delusions. Now, in the schema of the series, he is actually becoming Thor. I mean, he is actually. There's a point where he is holding his phone on an athletics track. He presses start on a stopwatch, and he runs 100 meters. And when he stops the stopwatch on his phone, he's bettered the world record for 100 meters by 2.5 seconds. And he's well aware of that. And so he's kind of dealing with his ascendance, right? But it's in other ways as well. At one point he gets quite angry and he just throws a hammer out of anger, and this hammer he eventually establishes using Google Maps, I believe, that he'd thrown the hammer, I think, half a kilometer, or just a really long distance. And then he checks that also on Google and finds out that he's bet the world record for hammer throw is 80 meters or something, and he's thrown more than 5 times as far without actually even trying. And then he also goes onto a football pitch and deliberately throws the hammer and then measures how like trying to throw it as hard as he can and then measuring it. And you kind of have this weird thing where he's becoming aware of his transformation. He heals quicker, he's getting stronger, he's faster, and his eyesight's improving and all this kind of thing. And yet, in other words, it's true for him. His reality is true for him. But when he goes to be assessed and he just tells people what he really thinks about what's going on, they say he's suffering from paranoid delusion. Now, in the real world, someone thinking they're becoming Thor would be paranoid delusion. In the fictional realm of a movie or a TV series, he's not paranoid and he's not deluded. That is what is happening. But that's that fictional world. And we are trying to apply this to what happened to Chris Watts. So replace the fabric of Frederick, Colorado instead of Finland, magic patches instead of Mjolnir, the hammer, and a rampant libido instead of Thor, you have Chris Watts. Now, if we hold on to the metaphor of patches equating to Thor's hammer, the source of his power, then we see just how significant and active a player Thrive, also known as paranoid delusions, could have been in this saga. It's easy to see how the hero becomes both physically and psychologically dependent on his magic trick, while also being physically and psychologically empowered by it. Does that make sense? So what happens when paranoid delusions manifest in the physical world? Physical destruction. We see that in the TV series on Ragnarok, and we see it in the Watts case. The more mental deterioration and breakdown in the background, the more the likelihood for physical carnage. That's what crime is. Crime is the physical manifestation of mental malaise. It's mental carnage on the plane of the physical, especially the physical human form, which must be destroyed and disposed of. In Ragnarok, the teenager becomes physically powerful just as his social power declines. His social power diminishes because of those trying to oppose him, but also because of his lack of knowledge about who he truly is. And that's really important. As I said earlier on, he's aware of the changes going on with him, but he's sort of not got a handle on it. And this causes those around him not to know who he is, and he also doesn't know who he is, and that's not good for social traction. In Chris Watts, we see similar forces at work. Lack of sleep coupled with high energy makes him more erratic. It starts the process of fashioning a new identity from the substrate. But the new identity isn't really new. It's the same shape as the old one, just shinier, almost like a perfect porcelain mask. His physical power increases while his social and financial power at home and in the home itself contracts. So what does he do? What must he do to survive? He grabs at another thread, one that will allow him to fully actualize. Kissinger offers him a path to redemption where he can be who he is, where his newfound, slightly altered, less inhibited psychology can be set free. Unfortunately, the path to redemption, which is another way to describe the promise of multi-level marketers, can sometimes be a path to destruction. Unfortunately, who Chris Watts turns out to be is both Mr. Nice Guy, or Dr. Jekyll, and a nightmare nobody saw coming, Mr. Hyde. The uninhibited Chris Watts under the suave stud muffin turns out to be a heartless and cowardly monster. This is because the mask can never sustain itself. It needs something underneath to keep it going, just as multi-level marketers do. In the movie Fight Club, the narrator, played by Edward Norton, has an alter ego he loses control of in the character of Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt. And Tyler Durden is kind of the mask of this Fight Club character. But but this mask needs the underlying character to sustain it. In other words, if the one character dies, so does the other. In order for this mask, the Tyler Durden character, to exist, it needs to be constantly sustained by the character underneath it. And for that to be sustained, the driving forces underneath, the delusions, the paranoia, the energy dynamics need to be those fuels need to be there. That the kindling needs to be there. The fire and those driving forces need to be constantly there. Otherwise, there's nothing to sustain the mask. There's no need then for the mask. Thrive thus empowers not so much the ego, but the alter ego. Hence the whole two-faced persona. But the alter ego isn't real. And that's where the psychology overtakes the physical process with devastating effect. We usually think of the ego leading to the alter ego, but we seldom see the same thing in reverse. So, for example, Superman's critique of the human race is Clark Kent, a shy, introverted, bumbling coward. Batman's critique is the almost saccharine billionaire playboy that everyone loves and can do no wrong. In the language of the multi-level marketing companies, this critique is basically, hey, a sucker is born every day, and who's going to take advantage of them? But let's come back to addressing the original question. Thrive is undoubtedly relevant to the Watts case. The question is, how big was the Thrive piece in terms of the total puzzle? It's fair to say if Kissinger wasn't a catalyst, if she wasn't present as activator and agitator, the crime would not have happened. Also, if the cratering finances hadn't severely undermined the Watts family, the crime would not have happened. Thrive enabled both. Thrive is arguably the biggest piece in the puzzle, but activated in concert by two vulnerable and opposing psychologies, that of the emergent introvert and that of a dominant personality attempting to stay in control at all costs. Thriving day after day for months on end eventually put those personalities onto turbo boost, and after 5 weeks apart at the denouement, they found themselves completely and utterly at cross purposes. What happens when you apply the Thrive Gospel literally? Watts thought he'd found a quick solution to a complicated problem. He thought he could put you could paper it up with words, but the real world is a much lower threshold for bullshit than the world of make-believe and multi-level marketing. Now I want to refer you to two articles that are available online. One is from Healthline that did an assessment of Thrive, and you can read the full article in the description. I'm only going to go through the bottom line, and the bottom line basically says it's also worth remembering that while the product has received numerous positive reviews, many people that use it also sell it. This makes differentiating between genuine recommendations and sales pitches very difficult. In other words, what we're talking about here is the strong potential for deceit, where someone is talking up something because it's going to benefit themselves, it's going to benefit their bottom line. In other words, can you trust what people are saying? And that lies really at the heart of the Watts case. How much is real? How much can we trust about everyone in the story? Bear in mind, Thrive makes some very, very bold claims. It claims to aid weight loss, which is kind of the holy grail of the wellness industry and nutritional supplements. Anything that can do that is going to be a gold mine. So Thrive claims to be, I guess, a world lead in that department. Improve energy, even brain function. It's going to make you smarter. It's going to do that. But the problem is, does research bear this out? And interestingly, you don't get this kind of coverage from necessarily American media. You've got to go all the way to New Zealand to get this kind of criticism and objective coverage. But an article in very late 2017, so around about 8 months before the Watts family murders, this article came out titled "Thrive Weight Loss Patch Raises Questions," and it comes from the website stuff.co.nz, and it refers to experts, medical doctors, and directors of, in one instance, the medical director of a company called Honey Lab, warning why people need to be wary of these Thrive DFT patches. DFT stands for, I think it's dermal fusion technology or something like that, which is a fancy way of saying a patch on your skin, or new things happening with patches on your skin. That's kind of what it means. And what Dr. Sean Holt, the director of this lab, says is the claims, some of the claims and reasons why people are supporting these Thrive patches, it's not necessarily supported by clinical trials. And according to Holt, he says the best case is that it's a waste of money. He says the worst case is that it could be dangerous. He then refers to 16 adverse health events associated with Thrive reported to the US Food and Drug Administration since 2013, which is really not a lot. 16 isn't a lot. I've read another article that deals with health supplements in general that lists thousands. But in any event, what these did do is that they were directly linked to Thrive, and they refer to abdominal pain, headaches, and fatigue. 3 of them involved hospitalization. In any event, Dr. Holt says, I would be very skeptical that sufficient levels of the ingredients would pass through the skin. And he says there are no studies to confirm the levels that enter the bloodstream, if any. So what he's actually saying, what Dr. Holt is kind of saying is, personally, I don't think that if you had to put a patch on your skin, whether much chemical would go into your skin. He's basically saying, I don't think, no matter what the ingredients are, I really don't think you're going to see much of an effect. So that's his one criticism, is that you kind of spending a lot and going to a lot of effort for negligible results, or results that certainly are negligible or difficult to prove. And so you could argue, what are you actually buying when you buy this stuff? Well, maybe you're buying just a colorful patch that someone else is going to notice, and then you tell them about it. And then that's how In other words, you're a walking advertisement for Thrive and for Lev-vel. And when people see the patch on you, you then directly either advertise it or you know, in addition to that, you talk about it. You talk to the product and sell it. Whenever someone expresses interest in this colorful patch on your arm or shoulder or the side of your neck or wherever. So Dr. Holt goes on to say some of the ingredients are just bizarre. He refers to one with a weird name. It's not quite sure what it is, COQ10 or something like that, which can lower blood pressure if the dose is high enough. He refers to willow bark, which he says is basically aspirin. He says safety is a real concern. If high enough levels of that get into the bloodstream, the safety isn't known without clinical trials. And then Dr. Holt goes further and he says, something that really annoys me is the disclaimer on the label to seek advice from a health professional on the product. He says they have not done trials, so health professionals wouldn't know the levels, if any, getting in the body, and so cannot advise. So when Thrive says, seek medical advice when you're going to use our product, they're basically just washing their hands from whatever's going to happen. Because who are you going to go to for advice based on their products? Then there's someone else, the head of consumer research in New Zealand, Jessica Wilson, who also cautions against the buying of these products, just saying we don't see any substantiation of the claims. It's very expensive, and she says you'd be better off buying real food. And she says their advice, and again, this is the head of consumer research in New Zealand, is saying our advice to consumers is steer clear. This article also refers to Thrive's experience claiming to improve weight management, cognitive performance, immune support even, and can be age-defying. At one point in this article, it refers to some diet products in the past that have claimed to work by speeding the metabolism, have serious side effects, even death. And then we go to the user experience, and the Thrivers say, you know what, when you use this, you immediately have immediate and almost miraculous improvements to your health. Everything changes. Your lifestyle improves. You've got more energy. You're in a better mood. All this kind of thing. And the products are marketed as an 8-week Thrive experience. And some users say they've been using it for 2 and 3 years at a stretch. And one New Zealander from Auckland, Taryn Crew, said she'd been using it for 2 years. And because of it, she has more energy and recovers more quickly after exercise. The article in Stuff concludes just by referring to some of the endorsements on Facebook, on the Lev-vel Facebook page, saying, this is the easiest and most effective program I've ever tried. I'm thriving, my husband is too, and we love it, right? Then when Stuff tried to contact Lev-vel, they just weren't successful. When they tried to get hold of real people, they just couldn't get hold of anyone. One email triggered an automatic response intended for customers, and this is quoting from the article, saying, it's important to understand that our products are not intended to help, treat, mitigate, or cure any type of disease or disorder. If your testimony contains any mentions of a disease, disorder, medical condition, prescription medication, long-term health problem, or persistent long-term discomfort, it will not be posted, end quote. And we do know that Shanann made a couple of videos just saying how she struggled with Thrive and now she doesn't. Also how she's having the most wonderful pregnancy, third time round, whereas the first two were so difficult. I must say my perception reading the discovery was a bit different, that her pregnancy wasn't so going that well. It's difficult to say how much was due to the benefits of Thrive or whatever, or Chris Watts potentially poisoning his wife, that whole narrative. I don't want to go into the scientific aspect of it that much, even though I think it's relevant and one can. One can go through the ingredients and talk about it. One can talk about, how dangerous is ephedra and salicylic acid and synephrine. But I mean, it's hard enough just to pronounce half of these names. The way I want to talk about it is kind of just with quite a simple analogy. So the True Crime Rocket Science version of all this is basically, think of Thrive and Thrive products as coffee, or essentially the caffeine in coffee. Now, you may or may not be aware that you can lose weight just by ingesting huge amounts, basically overdoses of caffeine. What that does is it accelerates the heart rate, which accelerates the metabolism. So in other words, by taking large doses of a particular stimulant, all you're doing is you speeding up the process of being alive, which is another way of saying speeding up your lifespan. It's making you reach the end of your allotted heartbeats that you have in your life sooner. That's the way I see it. So caffeine does that. So anything that is going to do that, anything that's going to speed up your metabolism, is going to help you lose weight, but not in a good way. There's a good way to speed up your metabolism. Put on your running shoes, head out the front door and run. Go and swim, go and exercise, go for a walk. That's another way to speed up your metabolism, and you have all these other benefits as well. You, in a social environment, if you're at the gym, you feel the air of nature and the sights of nature around you if you're in that kind of environment, and your muscles respond. Your muscles are triggered. You get a sense of wellness. Taking pills, I don't think has nearly the same effect, but you may get the same kind of psychological effect where you feel dependent on it in order to have an improved appearance. In the same way that people become hooked on coffee. People that feel they have to have a cup of coffee to get themselves going in the morning. They have to have a cup of coffee to, in that dip you get in the afternoon. And so anything where you're addicted, you're going to get a kind of erratic kind of mood scenario where you're going to say, while I'm using this thing, I'm going to have a stable mood and stable energy. When I'm not, I'm going to be a problem. It's going to be difficult. And any addiction scenario is going to undermine your psychology and undermine your identity. In the same way where if you take Thor's hammer away from him, you're immediately going to put him into a crisis. So in that sense, I see some problems for the chemical ingredients, but I see a far more I see a far worse scenario for the actual psychological dependence and the sense of psychological well-being built on a house of cards that one gets from the almost like a placebo, except a very expensive one, and also an whole empire built around that to some extent. My impression of the whole Thrive thing through the Watts case was that it did have some weight loss impacts. It certainly did on Chris Watts. Bear in mind he was also exercising at home, and he was also running. He was running with Nick Thayer. So it's hard to say where Thrive began and ended, and where those efforts began and ended. He was also eating better, there was that aspect as well. If you look at Nicole Atkinson, she's been using Thrive for a long time. Has there been a noticeable change with her? I'm just using her as an example that it may not necessarily work. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make in this episode is I think the Thrive played an enormous role as a factor driving the psychology, fueling sleepless nights, causing someone who's maybe premeditating to be awake a lot later and, thinking things when they would otherwise be too tired to. running around having an affair when he would otherwise be too tired to, um, uh, getting himself into a position where someone wanted to have an affair with him. I'm not saying that is Thrive's fault, but Thrive certainly enabled that, and if you took Thrive away, would that have happened? So I'm really pointing it in terms of that respect. Also, I don't think you can underestimate the economic aspect. If you're involved in multi-level marketing for a length of time, with your finances being in a terrible state, what is going to happen? Is it going to make things better or worse? How is that going to affect your psychology when your psychology is based on telling everyone how good things are, no matter how bad things are? But the bottom line for me is you can't get away from the fact that Chris Watts committed this crime. You can't say because he had 5 cups of coffee or he drank a beer, you can't now blame the alcohol in the beer or the caffeine in the coffee. Chris Watts did what he did. We shouldn't be looking for any other culprit except for Chris Watts. And I think people see certain other people like Nicole Kessinger as a sexy story and one that people are interested in and it sort of titillates them. But I don't think it's a real story. In a sense, I don't think Thrive is a real story either. The real story is Chris Watts and what happened to him. I'm simply saying that Thrive did play a bigger role than I think has been acknowledged thus far. But True Crime Rocket Science will always come back to the identity and say that is the key to unlocking what happened and why. It is who are we dealing with. And I'm doing something similar in a review of Vincent van Gogh. I've just published the response letter he wrote to the art critic Albert Aurier in February. So I've just provided the verbatim transcript of the letter and also photos of the letter that he wrote to this art critic. It was the only praise he got from an art critic his entire life. And it's just that response. And he left the asylum shortly after that. Van Gogh's also an example where people want to make what happened to him about something else. So Thrive in the Van Gogh saga is kind of like mental illness. Did everything happen to Van Gogh because of mental illness? And the answer is no. A lot of what happened to Van Gogh was Van Gogh. His temperament, his attitude, his habits, the way he saw himself and the way he saw other people, what he was trying to do. And the exact same thing applies to Chris Watts. That's the key. The key is the person, the identity, not substances and chemicals and disorders, although they can play a role. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next time.